Welcome to OAC Vancouver's podcast. Thank you for tuning in. We believe that Jesus is needed and relevant for people in Vancouver today. The message of God's love and promise of wholeness was destined to be experienced within a faith community that worships, studies scripture, and prays together. We warmly welcome you to journey with us towards greater connection, purpose, and peace. We'll be sharing our recorded services and conversations with health and wellness experts. Enjoy.
Good morning, everybody. Glad you're here this morning. Welcome to those people that are present. Welcome to the people online. My name is Colin. I volunteer here as an on-call pastor when Pastor Rhoda is away. And right now she's in Kentucky. And being the good pastor she is, I got a text message from her just a few minutes ago while I was sitting there saying, I'm praying for you. That's the kind of pastor we have. If you've been around for the last few weeks, you know that we've been running a series, and it's all about moving from empire to kingdom. And a couple of weeks ago, Pastor Rhoda spoke, and she spoke about how the white Jesus has misrepresented who God is and has misrepresented who Jesus is. And then Kemi last week spoke about how white culture, could actually get in the way of cultural expressions of faith in different parts of the world. I watch those from at home. My wife's health is such that if I can't get someone to stay with her, I stay there. And my wife thought I was watching a hockey game. Because especially when it's focused, I'm applauding, I'm shouting, I'm going, yes, yes, yes. You can't do that in church, right? But so there is an advantage to watching from home sometimes. But you miss the energy. I miss the worship that we had this morning. So, moving from empire to kingdom. Decolonizing faith. It's something that's very, very close to my heart because here I am, a white male. I have born and brought up in South Africa during apartheid. I have experienced all the benefits and all the privileges of colonization. I have experienced every good thing that can come from empire has landed on me. Power, position, privilege, all mine. How dare I stand up here and speak this morning? I want to show you something. Have you seen this? This is it's called the Wheel of Power and Privilege. I know it's kind of hard to read from where you are, but it shows where people experience the most power and the most privilege. And there are 12 different segments in there. I score high on the power and privilege thing on 7 of those 12 segments. How dare I stand up and speak here this morning? What do I have to say to this? But I've been encouraged to do so because I guess I have a story to tell. I would far rather be preaching this morning than telling my story. This is incredibly uncomfortable for me. And I don't want you to get the wrong impression. This story is all about the goodness and grace of God, how it has played out in my life. I know we're all different, and so I'm praying that somehow my story will inform your story and that our lives might intersect in some way and spark some conversation. And hey, if you feel like it afterwards, come and let's talk. I really don't want to give the impression that I've arrived at Kindom. I'm very much on the journey. I find myself tasting Kindom every now and then. However, as one of my favorite U2 songs says, I still haven't found what I'm looking for. I'm still on that journey. I'm still getting there. And if we have a look at that privilege wheel, All of those things on there that score high on power and privilege were amplified out of all proportion in my life growing up. As a young child, people would walk up to me, adults of a different race, and call me master or little master simply because of the color of my skin. I went to a school that had absolutely everything that opened and shut. We had the best of textbooks, we had the best of equipment, we had the best of everything. And yet, not far away from my school, was another school. It was in the township, or in the location, as it was called in South Africa. And the chances are they didn't have textbooks, at least not enough for every student. They didn't have a science lab, or if they did, it wasn't the best equipped science lab. Our school had a wonderfully equipped woodwork department. I learned how to do woodwork there. The other school, not so much. I love playing sport. And if you came to our school, the sports fields were absolutely beautiful, lush green grass. All the best sports equipment that you could wish for. But you go to that school in the township or location, and what surrounded that school could not even begin to be called a playing field. If there was grass on it, it was just here and there. The imbalance of this was so marked. And at home, I was taught to treat everybody with dignity and respect. Now I'm going to rephrase that. I was strongly taught to treat everybody with dignity and respect. And it had a huge impact on me because my parents lived it. If I went to my dad's work and a black man walked into the office, I had to call him Mr. So-and-so. And it upset him so much. Little master, please don't call me Mr. And my dad would say, but you are Mr. Sir. That was the way I was brought up in my home. But there was a huge conflict going on in my life because that happened in my home, but outside of my home was completely different. Outside of my home, it was hard not to accept and believe and immerse yourself in that master messaging. It was hard not to say, yes, I deserve to be called, as a little boy. That gets to you. And so there's this conflict going on. And I really struggled with it. This master messaging was the air I breathed. It was really hard not to let it get to my head. The conflict was real. And back then, as a child, I didn't have the tools to deal with it. Something was missing. As I grew up, I was able to navigate my way through treating people with dignity and respect a little bit better as I matured. I eventually went to school to study to become a pastor. And when we graduated, our graduating class was different. It was the first racially integrated graduating class in the college, the first time ever, 1975. And some people are going, hey, ancient history. Yeah, I know. I was asked to be class president. And we had a problem. Over the few years that the school had become integrated before and up until this graduating class, the students had learned to connect with each other. And race issues were slowly dissipating and not becoming that big a deal anymore. But now graduation was coming and their parents were coming onto campus. And we had to have a hard conversation because their parents would not understand if their son or daughter walked next to a person of a different race down the graduation aisle. I know it sounds weird. That's the way it was. And so here I am, class president, and I've got to deal with this. Oh boy, I was not equipped. I prepared myself. I loaded up on biblical texts, Galatians 3, There's neither Jew nor Greek, male nor female, etc., etc. I loaded up on all of that stuff. I loaded up on dignity and respect stuff. And we talked. And then I did something else. I loaded up on the power of position. I was the class president. I got to say, right? But they all agreed with me. And we didn't solve the problem. Something was missing. And I discovered that day you can be 100% right on your principles and 100% wrong on your process. And you can be 100% right on things like biblical truth and biblical principles. And you can actually cause divisions which get in the way of kingdom. That day I used a mixture of treating people with dignity and respect, except that I also used power and position, which meant that some people didn't get treated with dignity and respect. You can't choose who you're going to treat that way. Something was missing. A few years go by, and I'm now on the pastoral staff of that college. And it has become a racially integrated church. Sabbath afternoons were wonderful in our home. We had people from all races coming to have lunch with us. Now you're going, so what? You've got to understand that never happened anywhere else. And you'll understand just how far that was. I was going with that, or we were going with that, when I tell you that every now and then on a Sabbath afternoon, the police car would come and park just outside our house. They never came in. But just a little bit of intimidation. They hoped that would work. Obviously, my neighbors had been talking. And I discovered via the grapevine that some of them were very concerned that my having people of different races in my home and treating them with dignity and respect was actually lowering the value of their homes around me. And so, whenever the police cars showed up, I did what every good South African did. Pastor Wesley lived there. He could tell you there's a pot of rooibos tea boiling on the stove of every South African home 24 hours a day. So good. The smell. So what do? Get a couple of cups of rooibos tea and go out and serve the police officers. To their credit, I would say that some of them were very embarrassed with what they had to do. Others were, thank you, sir, and took. But I didn't realize how far this was going, but until we discovered that our mail was being opened. And our telephone calls were being monitored. You'd hear, if someone said goodbye on the other end and you just stayed on the phone for a while, you'd hear a click before you'd hear another click. Through all of this, I was becoming more and more aware that treating people with dignity and respect was good as far as it went, but it was still not enough. And by then, I was having authentic relationships with people of different races. And, those kind of authentic relationships where you can actually talk to each other honestly, when you can actually tell someone what you really think. And one of my black friends one day says to me, you know what, bro? We know you love us. We love you. We're tight. Just got to tell you something. Just so you know. Sometimes it feels like you're being patronizing. I didn't even realize it. You see, being nice isn't good enough. Being tolerant doesn't cut it. Because of my position and privilege, I could afford to be nice. But it was kind of like Santa Claus handing out candies. Something was missing. And all of this power and privilege worked in other ways too. I love theology. I read voraciously. But I discovered something. 99% of the theology books was written by people who looked like me. Cisgendered white males. My theology was reinforcing my privilege. Pastor Rhoda spoke of white Jesus a few weeks ago. Theology can very easily become an exercise in creating God in our own image. Something was missing. But let's move through time quite fast now. And my son is now old enough to consider getting married, and he brings a girl named Crystal, or Kit, home. They are now married, and she's my daughter. Kit is part First Nations. I thought I understood the situation between the colonizers and First Nations. But boy, I had no idea. And we had some amazing conversations, and we still do. And every now and then, just yesterday, I got another text. Hey, Dad. It was a crash course, man. But I have to be honest with you, I had a private struggle going on. And it wasn't based on race, not at all. It was another kind of struggle. And I've discovered that whenever I find myself struggling over something, I need to go to God with open hands and say, God, this is bothering me, and it's not about them, it's about me. Why is it bothering me? What's going on in here that's causing this to be a bother? Well, what was going on in here was that I'd been brought up to believe that you let bygones be bygones. You let things go and you move on. You don't let the sun go down on your wrath type thing. And then my theology of forgiveness, I discovered, was completely inadequate. I was taught to forgive, but sometimes forgiveness only happens after lament. And I wasn't letting myself lament enough, and I expected others not to as well. And so my problem was I couldn't understand why there was so much focus on what happened in my mind so long ago. God, I'm messing up here somehow. There's something wrong in me. And I need to know what it is. You know, when you get that real with God, God gets that real with you in ways that totally surprise you. My last name is Griffiths. Our family comes from Wales. My dad was born there. My grandmother born there. And my uncle's first name is Dye, which is Welsh for David. They spoke Welsh. I don't know if you're aware of the Welsh history, but there was a time which only ended in 1964 where Welsh language was banned. And only in 1964 was it fully back in use for official documents. And I remember my grandfather telling me this story. Now, I don't speak Welsh. I speak a little bit. You know that long station name? Yeah, I can say that. So I get about 15 words because there's about like 15 words in that long station name. I don't speak the language. But we were in Cardiff. And we went into the visitors center in Cardiff, and there were two ladies there, and they were speaking Welsh, and something happened to me. And even just telling you about it right now, I've got goosebumps. I heard them speaking Welsh, and they saw us, and they switched to English with that Welsh lilting accent that I can't imitate well. And then I said to the lady, please do me a favor. She said, what's that? I said, don't stop talking. And she looked at me like I was weird, which I suppose she's right. And the tears started coming, and I said, my grandfather was born just down the road here, and my dad too. I've been to the house they were born in. And when you talk, I remember my grandfather. I remember my ancestors. And then the tears really came. And it burned into me what it meant and how powerful language is. Even though it was never my language. And it burned into me what my grandfather and my grandmother and the rest of the family must have gone through. When you have a language that's easy to communicate in and you've got to use another. By the way, going back to schools in South Africa, there were schools that for white people that taught in the two white languages. The schools for black people taught in the white languages. And suddenly I got what was wrong in me. Something was missing. In fact, the reality is I was missing something. Let's lighten this up a little bit. Have you ever done any home renovation? Anybody? Come on, please. Yeah, okay. How'd it go? Not so long ago, my son and I decided that we have to replace our back deck. You know, we're just going to take the boards off, check the substructure, and then put new boards on, and boom, 2 days done, right? And I could see those who've done home renovations are smiling and shaking their heads and going, yeah, not a chance. You're right, not a chance. Took the boards off, looked at the substructure, and said, uh-oh. Looked at that board along the wall where the deck was fastened to the wall, and it was starting to rot. Took that off, found a whole ant's nest behind that under the floorboards. Pulled those out and found moisture. We had to take out the ceiling in the basement. Here's the deal with this. When you start taking things apart, you discover things you don't know. And there are lots of people nowadays that are talking about deconstruction when it comes to their faith experience. That when you start scratching beneath the surface, you discover things you don't know. That is the journey I'm on. Having the courage to scratch beneath the surface and having the courage to find out what else is there. What do I not know? Because you see, when that privilege wheel again, I'm so used to functioning in power. I'm so used to functioning in position. I'm so used to functioning with privilege. It was part of my DNA, part of the air I breathed. I have to very, very consciously let that go. No, I have to very, very consciously give all that to God. But I've discovered something else, and we'll put this up on the slide. God is bigger than my understanding of God. So letting my understanding of God go is not that bad a thing to do. It's actually a good thing to do because guess what? If I let go the box that I put God in, and then all of a sudden God can get bigger. And He does. My ideas about God are not God. So part of my journey with the issue of having power was to start looking at power in the Bible and see how it works. And so I want to take you to the familiar, the super familiar, the thing that you know so, so well. And if you've been around Adventists, you're going to know this. Can we just put that picture of that statue on the screen? Okay. I'm not going to give you too many points, but where's that from? A little bit louder, please. Daniel. Anyone remember which chapter? Daniel chapter 2. Exactly. We know this, right? I thought I did. I thought I had this down. I thought, okay, man, I could teach this in my sleep. Quick summary. The king by the name of Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. He can't remember what the dream is. So he calls a whole bunch of his wise people together and says, tell me my dream and tell me what it means. And they go, time out, king, can't be done. And eventually Daniel comes along and says, I can't do it either, but I know God who can. Give me a little bit of time. And so he goes off and he comes back and he says, Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar, here's the deal. You had a dream about a statue. And it was, look, can we just go back to statue? it looks like this. And each one of those elements on the statue reflect a different kingdom. You, O king, are the head of gold. And then there's another military might, the Medo-Persians, and then there's another military power, King Alexander and the Greeks. And then there's the Romans, and they are known for their military power. When I was in high school, I studied Latin. One of the books we read was Caesar's Gallic Wars. Julius Caesar was known, one claim to fame, he fought wars. And so this whole statue is about military might. But then, if you remember the story, there's this rock that is cut out and it drops on the feet of the statue and destroys the statue. And now we can go back to that other text, please, where it says, a stone was cut out, not by hands. Not by hands. Daniel 2 verse 34, Daniel 2 verse 45, a stone was cut out from the mountains, not by hands, without hands. So it's telling us how the stone was not cut out. No hands involved. And so we've usually read that to mean that there was no human beings were doing it, no people cutting it. And the wording justifies that idea. A stone was cut out not by human hands. Some of your Bibles read exactly that. Except that the word human's not there. It just says not by hands. And so we usually read this to mean who is doing it. We focus on the fact that if it's not by hands, then God must be doing it. The absence of hands means God's acting. But how does God act? Does the verse tell us anything at all about how God does it? I believe it does. But you've got to go taking things apart just a little. Because in both Hebrew and Aramaic, the word for hands and the word power are the same word. Actually, in Daniel 12, verse 7, it says not by. It speaks about power, and the word there it used is the same word for hands. So we can read this verse very legitimately, and the stone was cut out not by power. Oh. This verse is not only telling us God is doing it, it's telling us how God does it. Those previous kingdoms were all about power. They were all about military might. They were all about subjugation. They were all about being in control. And now God comes along and he starts something completely new. And it's not like that. It's completely different. Not by power. A stone was cut out, but not by power. What God is doing here is something completely different. What God is doing here doesn't look like empire at all. Empire is defined by that statue. Kingdom is defined by the stone. Here's my definition of kingdom for what it's worth. Kingdom is the compassionate and inclusive reign of God that is characterized by who is included rather than who is excluded. This is about the kinship or connectedness of all humankind, as well as the kinship or connectedness shared with all of God's creation. I love how last week Kemi took us back to John chapter 3 verse 16 and talked about how God so loved the world. There's the essence of kingdom right there. But you know what John chapter 3 verse 17 says? God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. If I had dealt with my meeting back with my graduating class and I didn't use any power, how would the meeting have been different? If I had dealt with my meeting back with that graduating class without any condemnation, without any judgment, how would that meeting have been different? If I walk through this world without any power, without any judgment, how do I walk differently than what I walk today? I believe the Bible is talking to that very issue. Much like Jesus' disciples, struggling with how to be a person of power and position and how to live in that with integrity. And so, two of the disciples want to have a power conversation with Jesus. How do you best have a power conversation? Well, you recruit some powerful people to come and have the conversation for you. And so that's exactly what they do. They look for the most powerful person they can find, and they bring their mom. And she sits down with Jesus and says, I want to ask you something. Matthew chapter 20. I want you to have my son sit in your right and left hand when you come in your kingdom. She had the picture of the kingdom being the same as Rome, Medo Persia, Greece, Babylon. She had the picture of the kingdom of God being that power broker kingdom. And Jesus says, you have no idea what you're asking for. You have no idea what my kingdom looks like. And very often, I've got to be I say, you know what, I'm not so totally clear either. As they have this conversation, the rest of the guys hear about it. Division happens. Because whenever power, position, and privilege come into the picture, it causes division every single time. And they get very, very annoyed. How come they thought of it first? And so Jesus sits down with them and he says, you know, Matthew 20, 25 through 28, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who are great exercise authority over them, yet it shall not be so among you. But whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant. Whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, to give his life a ransom for many. And that gave me a strong clue to what I was missing. In another place, Jesus talks about loving God, loving your neighbor, loving your enemy. And oh boy, if I went beyond dignity and respect to actually loving people, what difference would it make? I think it's like a world of difference, right? This is what I was missing. What would it look like if I moved through the world loving like that? What would it look like if I moved through the world with a servant mindset? What would it look like? How do I love my neighbor as myself? How do I have a servant mindset? Aren't loving your neighbor as yourself and being a servant, aren't those in conflict somehow? How do I love my neighbor who's been victimized by another neighbor without re-victimizing the victim? This is complicated. But here is something that sort of hit home to me. Just because it's complicated doesn't mean I shouldn't try. Just because it's complicated doesn't mean I shouldn't walk into it. Our God is the God of the complicated, guys. He can handle it, and he'll take us with him. And it's so easy just because it's complicated and because I can go, yes, but what about this circumstance? And therefore think that excuses all other circumstances. No, it doesn't. At least it didn't for me. This is way more challenging than simply telling people, well, there's these things that you believe in the Bible. If you believe those, I can baptize you. This is calling people to be a whole different kind of person. This is calling me to be a whole different kind of person. So I started praying, God, teach me to love the way you do. Scary stuff, just so you know. The way God does that, he brings people into your life that are not easy to love. This was going to take some radical deconstruction of the way I move through the world. This was going to mess with all my categories. It was so easy to put people in little boxes and say, you're there, you're there, you're there, and I know how to relate to each box. This is not that at all. It was something like being born again, you know. Perhaps one of the biggest power conversations that Jesus had was with a man named Nicodemus. And Jesus said to him, look, hey, dude, you got to get this, man. You got to be born again. I'm discovering you got to be born again, again, and again, and again, and again, and again. I needed this to be something that I could wrap my mind around. I needed this to be so concise that if I got up in the morning and my brain wasn't working properly yet, I knew what this looked like. And so here's my little thing that I wake up to in the morning. There's a world of difference between the power of love and the love of power. There's a world of difference between the power of love and the love of power. And I get every day to submit my choice of which one I'm going to live in to the God who is love. And not only every day, but multiple times a day. One of the Bible's summary statements of this that really sort of hits home to me is in Galatians 5 verse 6. I like how the Message puts it. For in Christ, neither our most conscientious religion nor disregard of religion amounts to anything. What matters is something far more interior. Faith expressed in love. So what would that look like in practice? Well, part of the answer I found in my racialized South African roots. Because having those authentic relationships with people of different races meant we could have real conversations. So sometimes one time I can remember asking, so how do you know someone's a racist? And they said, well, you just know. I said, yeah, but how? And I said, you know, if someone is just saying they're not a racist because it's the right thing to say, or they're just tolerating you in their presence, or they're actually dislike something about you, you will get the vibe. You will know. So for me, if my faith is going to express itself in love, then I can never ever say or think again in my life that I can love the sinner and hate the sin. Because if I hate something about you, you will know. That has to be off the cards. I cannot hate anything about anybody, which is hard. Because some people do very hateful things. But I can't let that hate get into me. Another part of God's answer became very clear to me in a strange way. About 8-9 years ago, we went to visit the mayor of Burnaby to have a conversation about our church in Burnaby at the time. And he said something interesting to me that was kind of like a word of God to my ears. He says, you know, you people from different faith groups, why don't you stop talking about each other and start talking to each other? Simple, right? But profound. So I thought, oh, how do we do that? And I realized that if I was going to do that, I should actually sit down and listen to people of different faiths and different perspectives and different ways of being. So instead of meeting people to witness to them, to tell them about Jesus' love, I sat down with them to understand them. Any DLX students here? Seeking to understand before you're understood. And the minute I became genuinely open to this, and please don't get the wrong impression, this is all what God does. I found myself just meeting amazing people, Jewish rabbis, who challenged me with our obsession about the 7 days of creation and missing out on the Creator God. A Muslim friend who we would go and we would serve the homeless of Burnaby together. And we would have real listening conversations with each other while we were doing it. And one day he called me and he said, "Hey, Colin, I've got someone you need to meet." And this man was had his doctorate in Sharia law from the University of Afghanistan. What a conversation. What a conversation. One of the leaders of Jainism in Vancouver, ever sat down with someone who's of the Jain faith? It's a beautiful faith. It's a beautiful faith. Sikh leaders, other Christian faiths, sitting down with members of the LGBTQ community to listen. To listen. There's another way of doing this. I stopped just reading theology from people like me, and I started reading from Latina theologians, feminist theologians, liberation theologies, and discovering that there is stuff in there that's of huge, huge value. Podcasts, social media. You want some names? Come and talk to me afterwards and I'll help you. And all the time just seeking to understand. Another thing that has changed, I used to pray, "God, send someone to me today that I can witness to. Please." As if I was the one who possessed all the wisdom about God, and if people came to me, they would get it. And I've stopped praying that way, and I now pray as I walk into anywhere. Like just yesterday, I went and did the shopping at our local supermarket, walk in the door, said, "God, I don't know what you're up to in this place today. I have no idea at all. But whatever it is, and if you think I can be part of it, hey, I'm your man." And just doing that regularly as you move from space to space. As you walk into your child's bedroom to say goodnight. "I don't know what you're up to, God, but if I can be part of it, I'm your person." I'm blown away by the conversations in food courts, in supermarkets, in coffee houses, on the sidewalk. Just 3 days ago, a young Sikh guy in my favorite chai cafe in Abbotsford, we had one of those conversations. The very next day, meeting someone in a coffee house. Yeah, there's a theme, right? Meeting someone in a coffee house. And while my friend hadn't arrived yet, I sat down next to someone else and we started a conversation. 3 minutes, it turns to faith. I have no idea how it happened. I didn't try to make it happen. I didn't engineer the conversation. I didn't make it work. It just happened. But the anchor of all of this, the thing that holds my feet to the ground, the thing that makes this so vital and essential for me, comes from the writings of a woman who I respect very, very much. When she says, you should spend a thoughtful hour each day contemplating the life of Christ, especially the closing scenes. And so I spend a lot of time, and especially in the Gospel of John, starting at chapter 12 and on through the end. In chapter 13, Jesus makes this completely crazy statement. All power has been given to me. Now, if you were in a position where you could honestly say, all power has been given to me, what would you do next? Let me tell you what Jesus did. He took off his outer garment, he picked up a towel and a bowl, and he washed people's feet. All power has been given to me, so I wash people's feet. What if I walked through town with a towel and a bowl? What if I walked through town with the mindset of a foot washer? All power has been given to me. Then we go to Calvary, the place where power, position, and privilege thought it had won the battle. The place where empire and kingdom come face to face in a huge clash. Calvary is the place where the love of God achieves its greatest expression. As Jesus is killed in the name of religious orthodoxy and executed in the name of imperial justice, he says, Father, forgive them. At the cross, we discover that the God revealed in Christ would rather die in the name of love than kill in the name of freedom. The cross is that greatest expression of God's love. Jesus doesn't die as the lone sufferer. Jesus dies as Emmanuel, God among the sufferers. This is the ultimate expression of the power of love. This is what compels me to open my hands day after day and say, please let go of the love of power. In the death of Jesus, we get a taste of what the rock cut out without power means. And the resurrection of Jesus takes that even further. In the resurrection of Jesus, God's new creation has already begun right here, right now. And we get to live in it. We get to live it out. In the world after resurrection, the universe is no longer a closed system where death gets the last word. The universe is now open to the infinite possibilities of life, and we get to walk out into life as life bearers. The death of Jesus leaves me in awe. The resurrection of Jesus gives me hope, not only for the future, but for right now, right here. God is all about turning death into life. And even when I start getting into death thinking patterns, the patterns of separation, the patterns of, I've got to establish my power, I've got to be in control, and you've got to, if only you would do it my way, all of that kind of thinking that sort of creeps in on us. Resurrection says, I can deal with that. I can deal with that. I like to think of the resurrection as God's way of telling us that God can take the absolutely worst thing in the world, the killing of the God-man Jesus, and change it into absolutely the best thing in the world, the redemption of the world that gives me hope. The gift of the power of love is something I want more and more and more of. Because the truth is, there's absolutely nothing missing there. God bless you.
Thank you for listening to OAC Vancouver's podcast. Learn more at oacvancouver.ca. If you're in Vancouver, join us for worship Saturdays at 11 a.m. at 5350 Bailey Street. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate, review, and subscribe. God bless you and have a wonderful day.